Taste of Many Mountains was written about Guatemala, and every time I return to Guatemala, I'm reminded about how it's a land of contrasts. In Guatemala, you have Crystal Lake surrounded by breathtaking volcanoes and deep green coffee fields, and you have this colorful and proud and ancient Mayan culture. But in Guatemala, you also have tremendous social problems and poverty that gave birth to a civil war that lasted 36 years. But in reality, it's the same conflict that's been repeated since the Europeans first set foot in the country over 500 years ago. Coffee arrived in Guatemala in the mid-19th century, but it continues to reflect the conflict between landowners and those who work the land. It's in the middle of this war in 1983 where the Taste of Many Mountains begins, with a woman from a coffee-growing village hiding in a barn. She watches as death squads enter her village, which is accused of siding with the guerrillas. And she watches in horror as some of the women, including her best friend Mildred, are lined up by the soldiers. And through her eyes, we see the conflict and violence in the world of coffee between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. And as she watches the brutality taking place in her village, she reflects on how during the harvest, she and Mildred would pick coffee together in the cool morning mist until dusk. And she remembers how they would eat tortillas and talk together for hours, their fingers sliding the coffee cherries off the plant and into the burlap sacks tied around their waists. So the plight of the woman hiding in the barn, whom we return to throughout the novel, leads us to the central story, which is about coffee and a group of graduate students investigating fair trade coffee and the history of coffee in Guatemala. Coffee is the most important export crop in Guatemala and a source of livelihood for many of the country's 6 million indigenous people. I wrote The Taste of Many Mountains for people who want to have a meaningful and effective relationship with the poor and developing countries. The book is about a woman named Angela, who was born in Guatemala but was adopted as an orphan and grew up in the United States. And she's returning to Guatemala for the first time, seeing her life as it would have been and comparing it with her life as she's lived it to that point in the United States. So she's on a research project in Guatemala investigating the impact of fair trade coffee. And this research project is an actual project that I was involved in at the University of San Francisco with my own students and students from the University of California, Berkeley. So in the story, Angela is with 3 other researchers, and each of them has a very different view about development and globalization issues. And they also have other issues themselves, personal issues as well. And so the book is about their relationship and their conversation about globalization and development, and their relationship with a coffee-growing family in Guatemala as they recount the history of coffee and their family over the generations in Guatemala. So I hope you enjoy the book. Thanks.